The phone rang at 7:30 on a Tuesday evening while I was cooking dinner in my Denver apartment. 6 months of blissful silence from my family, and suddenly my father, Robert, was on the line, demanding I drop everything to attend my brother Jason's wedding next weekend. Not asking, demanding. Because apparently the bride's family expected to see Jason's close-knit, successful family, and my absence would ruin their perfect image. The truly shocking part. When I mentioned I'd moved from Ohio to Colorado half a year ago, there was complete dead silence. Then he dismissed it like I'd mentioned changing my hairstyle and threatened to cut my inheritance if I didn't show up to play the part of loving sister. His stunned silence when I replied that I make more money than all of them combined was absolutely priceless. Looking back now, I should have seen this coming. My entire childhood was spent being the invisible middle child between golden boy Jason and precious baby Emma. Robert and Linda perfected the art of selective attention, showering praise on Jason's mediocre achievements while treating my actual accomplishments like background noise. I remember sitting alone at my high school graduation because they forgot to mark their calendars. They were at Jason's baseball game instead, cheering for his bench-warming performance on the junior varsity team. When I got accepted to Ohio State with a partial scholarship for computer science, Robert's only comment was asking if I could help Jason with his college applications since he was struggling with the essays. The pattern continued through college. They missed my dean's list ceremonies, but threw elaborate parties when Jason passed his real estate licensing exam on the 3rd try. They forgot my 21st birthday entirely, but spent $2,000 on Emma's Sweet 16 party. Every holiday dinner featured endless discussions about Jason's 3 house sales or Emma's part-time job at the mall, while my internships at tech companies warranted nothing more than polite nods. The breaking point came last May during my college graduation ceremony. I'd earned my computer science degree with highest honors and landed a position at a promising startup in Denver. I sent them the invitation months in advance, called to remind them twice, and even offered to arrange their hotel rooms. The morning of graduation, Linda called to say they couldn't make it because Jason was showing a house to very important clients and needed their moral support. That evening, I saw social media photos of the 3 of them at some chain restaurant celebrating Jason's latest listing. Not even a phone call to congratulate me. No acknowledgement that their daughter had just achieved something significant. That's when I realized I was done begging for crumbs of their attention. Moving to Denver felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a basement. The startup culture embraced innovation and hard work. My colleagues celebrated my successes and actually listened when I spoke. For the first time in my life, I felt valued for who I was, rather than overlooked for who I wasn't. I didn't make a big announcement about leaving Ohio. I simply packed my belongings, forwarded my mail, and drove west to start fresh. Part of me expected them to notice eventually and reach out. Another part hoped they'd realize how badly they'd been treating me and make an effort to reconnect. 6 months of complete radio silence proved exactly what I'd suspected all along. I truly was invisible to them. Until tonight, when suddenly they needed their successful daughter in tech to make an appearance for the sake of family image. Robert's voice took on that manipulative tone I remembered so well from childhood, the one he used when he needed something, but wanted to make it sound like he was doing you a favor. He explained that Jason's fiancée, Chelsea, came from the Thornton family, and apparently that name was supposed to mean something to me. The Thorntons own Thornton Manufacturing. He said like I should be impressed. They employ over 1,500 people across Ohio and Pennsylvania, multi-generational wealth. Darcy, Chelsea's father William, built the company from nothing, and now they're worth over $200 million. I stirred my pasta sauce and waited for the point. They expect to see a large, loving family at this wedding. Chelsea's been talking about meeting her future sister-in-law for months. Your mother and I have been telling them all about your success in the tech industry, how proud we are of our accomplished daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, they'd been bragging about achievements they'd never bothered to acknowledge when they happened, using my career to elevate their social standing while maintaining zero actual relationship with me. The wedding is at Riverside Country Club, Robert continued. Very exclusive membership. The Thorntons are covering most expenses, but this is our chance to show we belong in their social circle. Linda's already planned our outfits to coordinate with the wedding colors. We need you there, Darcy. The family has to look united and successful. I almost laughed. After years of treating me like an afterthought, they suddenly needed me to complete their picture-perfect family tableau. The venue choice explained everything. Riverside Country Club was old money territory where appearances mattered more than authenticity. The kind of place where parents competed over their children's achievements like trophies on a shelf. We've been telling the Thorntons how close our family is, Robert pressed on. How we have regular family dinners and stay in constant contact. Chelsea's excited to gain a sister, especially one with your background in technology. Her father's always interested in innovation and emerging industries. My background in technology. Not my personality, my interests, or my character. Just the professional credentials that made them look good by association. They'd been using my career as social currency while treating me like a stranger. This wedding could open doors for Jason's real estate business. William mentioned he might be looking for agents to handle property acquisitions for the company. We can't afford any family drama or discord. The Thorntons value traditional family relationships and strong bonds between siblings. Traditional family relationships, strong bonds between siblings. The hypocrisy was staggering. They'd spent decades fostering competition and resentment between us kids, and now they wanted to present themselves as the epitome of family harmony for an audience of wealthy strangers. So you'll fly in Friday and stay through Sunday. Robert concluded as if my attendance was already decided. Linda will email you the itinerary and dress code requirements. This is important, Darcy. More important than whatever you have going on in Denver. Whatever I have going on in Denver. 6 months in my new city, building a career and creating meaningful relationships dismissed as insignificant compared to their social climbing agenda. Before I could respond to Robert's demands, Linda's voice replaced his on the phone. I could hear the artificial sweetness that meant she was about to deploy her most manipulative tactics. Darcy, sweetheart, I've missed you so much. She gushed like we'd spoken yesterday instead of half a year ago. I've been telling everyone about my brilliant daughter and how close we are. Margaret Thornton and I have become such good friends planning this wedding together. She keeps asking when she'll get to meet you. I bit my tongue to keep from pointing out that she could have introduced us months ago if she'd actually maintained contact with me. I told her all about our mother-daughter shopping trips and our weekly phone calls. She's so envious of our relationship. Her own daughter lives in California and they barely speak twice a month. I bragged about how we text each other constantly and share everything that's happening in our lives. My stomach turned. Linda had constructed an elaborate fantasy about our non-existent relationship, complete with fictional bonding activities and regular communication. She'd been telling Margaret Thornton outright lies for months. Margaret's planning a special brunch for all the mothers and daughters in the wedding party. She specifically requested that you sit at our table because she wants to meet Jason's wonderful sister that I'm always talking about. I showed her the photos from your last visit home, the ones from Christmas dinner where you looked so happy and beautiful. I hadn't been home for Christmas. The photos she was describing didn't exist because the visit never happened. Linda was either delusional or lying so extensively that she'd started believing her own fabrications. And, Darcy, honey, there's something else I need to tell you. I may have gotten a little carried away when Margaret asked about the wedding party arrangements. I told her you were going to be Jason's best woman since you two have always been so incredibly close. She thought it was such a modern, progressive choice and praised me for raising children who break traditional gender roles. I nearly dropped the phone. Not only had she invented a close relationship between us, but she'd also volunteered me for a prominent role in the wedding ceremony without my knowledge or consent. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. I know it's unconventional, but Chelsea thought it was sweet when I suggested it. She said it showed what a tight-knit family we are that Jason would choose his sister over his male friends for such an important position. The The maid of honor dress has already been ordered in your size. Coral pink, which will look stunning with your complexion. Coral pink, a color I absolutely hated, which Linda would have known if she'd paid attention to me at any point in the last decade. She'd committed me to wearing an ugly dress and standing at an altar pretending to be the devoted sister I'd never been allowed to be. We're all so excited for this weekend, sweetheart. It's going to be perfect. The Thorntons will see what a loving, successful family Jason comes from. Your father's been practicing his father of the groom speech, and he plans to mention how proud he is of all 3 of his children, especially you and your impressive career in Colorado. My impressive career that they'd never asked about, celebrated, or acknowledged until they needed it for social leverage. The same career that was apparently thriving in some fantasy version of our relationship where we maintained regular contact and shared life updates. Oh, and honey, make sure you bring business cards. William's very interested in technology investments, and Margaret mentioned he might want to discuss potential opportunities with you. This could be wonderful networking for your future. Networking. They wanted me to perform professional networking at a family wedding, treating me like a business asset rather than a daughter. The weekend was shaping up to be an elaborate performance, where I'd play the role of loving family member while they basked in reflected glory from my achievements. After Linda finally finished her guilt-laden monologue, Jason called separately an hour later. I'd been hoping he might be different, that maybe he'd acknowledge how strange this whole situation had become. Instead, his first words shattered any remaining illusions about family loyalty. "Darcy, thank God you're finally answering your phone. I've been trying to reach you for weeks." A lie, since my call log showed no missed attempts from his number. "Listen, I need you to understand how important this weekend is for me and Chelsea. Her family has certain expectations about the kind of people they associate with." His tone carried that familiar condescension, like he was explaining something too complicated for me to grasp on my own. The same tone he'd used throughout childhood whenever he wanted to establish his superiority. I've been telling Chelsea and her parents about my successful sister who works in Silicon Valley technology. They're impressed by your career trajectory and the innovative companies you've been involved with. William Thornton specifically mentioned being interested in cryptocurrency and startup investments. I'd never worked in Silicon Valley and my startup was based in Denver, but Jason had apparently embellished my background to make himself look better by association. Just like Linda's fictional stories about our relationship, Jason had constructed a narrative that served his purposes regardless of accuracy. The thing is, Chelsea's really excited about gaining a sister. She's been planning activities for us to do together after the wedding, talking about double dates and holiday celebrations. Her family values close sibling relationships, and she's told them how much I've mentored you throughout your career. Mentored me. The word hit like a physical blow. Jason had never offered guidance, support, or encouragement for my professional aspirations. He'd actively discouraged me from pursuing computer science, claiming it was too competitive, and suggesting I consider more realistic options like teaching or administrative work. I may have exaggerated a little bit about how much advice I gave you when you were starting out, Jason admitted with a nervous laugh. But it's not really lying, right? I mean, brothers are supposed to support their sisters, so it's more like describing what should have happened rather than what did happen. What should have happened rather than what did happen. Jason was rewriting history to cast himself as the supportive older brother, while erasing the reality of his dismissive, often cruel treatment of my ambitions. He'd turned my actual achievements into proof of his fictional mentorship. Chelsea's father is particularly interested in hearing about the patent applications you've filed. I told him you developed some innovative algorithms that could revolutionize data processing. He's considering some major technology investments for his manufacturing operations, and having a sister-in-law with that kind of expertise reflects well on the whole family. I'd filed 2 provisional patents related to machine learning optimization work I'd done entirely on my own through late nights and weekend research. Jason had somehow learned about them, probably through Robert's occasional conversations with distant relatives, and claimed credit for inspiring or guiding my innovations. Look, I know we haven't talked much lately, but family is family right, and this wedding is my shot at real success. The Thorntons could refer high-end clients to my real estate business. Chelsea mentioned that her uncle needs an agent for some commercial property deals worth millions. This isn't just about one weekend, Darcy. This is about my entire future. His entire future built on lies about our relationship and stolen credit for my accomplishments. Jason was asking me to participate in a charade that would benefit his career while contributing nothing meaningful to my life. He was treating my presence like a business transaction necessary for closing a deal rather than celebrating a family milestone. I already booked your hotel room at the Marriott downtown, corporate rate so it's not too expensive, and I'll cover your flight if you book something reasonable. Think of it as an investment in family relationships. Chelsea's really looking forward to getting to know her new sister better. An investment in family relationships that we'd never actually cultivated. Chelsea was expecting to meet someone who didn't exist, the loving sister from Jason's fabricated stories. I'd be walking into a weekend of performance art pretending to be close to people who'd treated me like a stranger for years. The most painful part was realizing that even now, when Jason needed something from me, he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge the real damage our family dynamic had caused. Instead of apologizing for years of neglect or expressing genuine desire to rebuild our relationship, he was asking me to enable his deception for personal gain. When I hung up the phone, I sat in my quiet Denver apartment and felt the full weight of their betrayal. They'd spent months using my name and achievements to elevate their social standing, never once considering that I might want a say in how my life was represented to strangers. They'd built their wedding narrative around a version of me that existed only in their self-serving imagination. The next morning brought another call from Robert, but this time his voice carried a harder edge. The false pleasantries were gone, replaced by the calculating businessman who'd built his insurance agency through strategic manipulation rather than genuine relationship building. I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Darcy and I realize you might not fully understand the financial implications of your decision. Your grandfather's estate planning included specific provisions about family unity and maintaining relationships between his descendants. I poured my coffee and settled in for what I suspected would be an illuminating conversation about family finances that had been hidden from me for years. When Grandpa Harold established the trust fund, he included clauses requiring all 3 grandchildren to demonstrate ongoing family relationships and mutual support. The quarterly distributions depend on evidence of regular contact and participation in family events. Weddings, holidays, major celebrations. The kind of gatherings that show we're still functioning as a cohesive family unit. This was the first I'd heard about any conditions attached to my grandfather's inheritance. Robert had always described it as a straightforward trust fund that would distribute equal shares to each grandchild when certain age milestones were reached. The idea that our inheritance was contingent on performing family harmony was both surprising and perfectly in character for my grandfather's controlling personality. The trust administrators require annual documentation proving that all 3 of you maintain close relationships with each other and with your parents. Photos from family gatherings, evidence of regular communication, witness statements from family friends about your bonds. If any of those requirements aren't met, the entire distribution structure changes. Robert's voice carried a subtle threat, but I could hear something else underneath it. Desperation. Fear. The kind of tone that suggested he had more to lose than he was initially admitting. Your absence from Jason's wedding wouldn't just be disappointing, Darcy. It would be financially catastrophic for all of us. The trust administrators would interpret your non-participation as evidence of family breakdown. That could trigger a complete restructuring of the distributions, potentially delaying payments for years while they investigate family stability. I started taking notes suddenly, understanding why Robert had been so insistent about my attendance. This wasn't just about impressing the Thorntons or maintaining social appearances. There was significant money at stake, money that Robert apparently needed more urgently than he'd let on. But here's what you might not realize. Robert continued his tone, shifting to something that sounded almost panicked. The trust provisions don't just affect your individual inheritance. If the administrators determine that family unity has broken down, they can withhold distributions to all beneficiaries, including your parents. Linda and I are supposed to receive annual payments from the trust as well, compensation for managing family relationships and maintaining connections between the grandchildren. Annual payments to my parents. Robert and Linda had been receiving money from my grandfather's trust fund for successfully keeping their children close and connected. They'd turned family harmony into a paid performance, with financial incentives for maintaining the appearance of loving relationships. Those payments help us maintain our lifestyle and cover business expenses when the insurance agency has slow periods. Without that income, we'd need to make some significant adjustments to our financial planning. The house payment, Linda's boutique operations, our country club membership. Everything becomes more challenging without those trust distributions. The picture was becoming clearer. Robert and Linda weren't just using my achievements for social status. They were financially dependent on maintaining the fiction of family unity. My presence at the wedding wasn't about celebrating Jason's happiness or honoring family bonds. It was about protecting their access to money they'd been receiving for years without my knowledge. I've already spoken with the trust attorneys about potential solutions if you continue to be uncooperative. They suggested we could petition to have your portion redistributed to Jason and Emma, citing abandonment of family responsibilities. It wouldn't be difficult to document your absence from family gatherings over the past year. My absence from family gatherings that I'd never been meaningfully included in to begin with. Robert was threatening to use my independence against me, framing my move to Denver as evidence of severed family ties, rather than acknowledging the years of neglect that had driven me away. But I'd prefer not to involve lawyers in legal challenges, Darcy. Family should be able to work things out privately. All I'm asking is that you show up for one weekend smile for some photos and help us maintain the documentation we need for the trust administrators. After that, you can go back to your life in Colorado, and everyone benefits financially. One weekend of performance art in exchange for continued access to inheritance money. Robert was essentially asking me to provide evidence for a lie, to participate in creating false documentation about family relationships that would satisfy legal requirements while perpetuating the dysfunction that had driven me away in the first place. The truly disturbing part was realizing how long this financial arrangement had been influencing family dynamics. Had Robert and Linda's treatment of their children been shaped by trust fund requirements? Were their parenting decisions motivated more by inheritance logistics than genuine care for our well-being? Think about it carefully, Darcy. This isn't just about hurt feelings or family drama. This is about everyone's financial security and your grandfather's legacy. He wanted his descendants to stay close to each other, and the trust fund was designed to incentivize exactly that kind of family loyalty. Incentivize family loyalty. My grandfather had tried to purchase genuine relationships through financial coercion, and my parents had been willing participants in that transaction. They'd been paid to maintain connections with their children, turning love into a commodity with quarterly performance reviews. When Robert hung up, I realized the inheritance threat wasn't just about cutting me off from money. It was about protecting a financial arrangement that had been subsidizing their lifestyle for years. They needed me to play along with their charade not just for the Thorntons, but for the trust administrators who held the purse strings to their comfortable existence. That evening, I decided to investigate my family's claims about their success and financial stability. Years in tech had taught me the value of thorough research before making any major decisions, and Robert's desperation about the trust fund payments had raised several red flags about their actual economic situation. I started with public business records searching for information about Robert's insurance agency. Premium Insurance Solutions had been operating for 15 years, but the financial filings told a troubling story. Revenue had been declining steadily over the past 3 years, with several quarters showing significant losses. Customer complaints on business review websites mentioned poor service, delayed claims, processing, and difficulty reaching Robert during business hours. The agency's online presence was outdated and unprofessional, suggesting Robert hadn't invested in modernizing his operations or adapting to changes in the insurance industry. His client testimonials were sparse and dated, indicating he was losing business to competitors who offered better digital services and more competitive rates. Linda's boutique clothing store painted an even bleaker picture. Elegant Expressions had accumulated substantial debt to inventory suppliers and faced multiple liens from creditors. The store's social media accounts showed frequent sales events and clearance promotions, signs of desperate attempts to move excess merchandise and generate cash flow. Several fashion blogs mentioned the store's outdated inventory and high prices compared to online retailers. Local business publications had covered Linda's financial struggles, including a brief mention of potential bankruptcy proceedings that had been delayed through negotiations with creditors. The boutique's lease was apparently several months behind, and the landlord had initiated eviction procedures that were currently stalled in court proceedings. Jason's real estate career was even more disappointing than I'd expected. His professional profile showed only 3 completed transactions in the past 2 years, all modest residential properties with minimal commissions. His attempts to break into commercial real estate had failed to generate any documented sales, despite his claims about working with important clients and major property deals. His real estate license had been inactive for several months due to unpaid continuing education requirements and outstanding fees to the state licensing board. The agency where he'd been working had dropped him from their roster, and he was currently operating as an independent contractor without office space or administrative support. Meanwhile, my own financial situation had evolved dramatically since moving to Denver. The startup where I worked had completed its Series B funding round, increasing the value of my equity position to over $5 million. My base salary had increased to $400,000 annually with performance bonuses that typically added another $100,000 to my yearly income. My cryptocurrency investments made during graduate school, when Bitcoin was still under $10,000, had appreciated to over $3 million in current value. My diversified stock portfolio built through systematic investing over the past 5 years was worth approximately $700,000 and generated substantial dividend income quarterly. The downtown Denver condo I'd purchased was now worth significantly more than my mortgage balance, giving me substantial equity in prime real estate. My retirement accounts were fully funded and growing steadily through aggressive contribution strategies that my tech salary made possible. I owned my car outright, carried no credit card debt, and maintained emergency savings that could cover 2 years of living expenses without any employment income. My net worth exceeded $8.5 million, making me financially independent by any reasonable measure. Comparing my situation to my family's financial struggles was sobering. While they'd been collecting trust fund payments and living beyond their means, I'd been building genuine wealth through career advancement and smart investing. The inheritance money they were so desperate to protect represented a fraction of my annual investment gains. The irony was devastating. They'd treated me like the unsuccessful child, the one who needed guidance and support to achieve modest accomplishments. Meanwhile, I'd quietly built more wealth than the rest of the family, combined without any assistance or recognition from them. My research also revealed information about the Thornton family that Robert had either misunderstood or misrepresented. William Thornton had indeed built a successful manufacturing business, but he was known in business circles for his integrity and straightforward approach to relationships. He valued authenticity over social climbing and had a reputation for ending business relationships when he discovered dishonesty or manipulation. Margaret Thornton was actively involved in several charitable organizations focused on supporting women in business and technology. She'd built her own successful consulting firm before marrying William and was known for mentoring young professional women. Her LinkedIn profile showed genuine interest in innovative technologies and startup companies. The Thorntons weren't the shallow social climbers Robert had described. They were successful business people who would likely see through the artificial family performance being planned for the wedding weekend. If they discovered the lies Linda had been telling about our relationships, it would probably damage Jason's prospects rather than enhance them. Armed with this information, I began formulating my response to the family's demands and threats. I had more leverage than they realized, both financially and in terms of understanding the true stakes involved in their wedding charade. The next morning brought a call from Linda that immediately set off every manipulation alarm I'd developed through years of dealing with family drama. Her voice carried that trembling quality she used when preparing to deploy emotional weapons designed to devastate any resistance to her demands. "Darcy, sweetheart, I have something very serious to tell you, and I need you to sit down before I explain what's been happening with my health." The dramatic pause was perfectly timed for maximum impact. "I've been to see Dr. Richardson several times over the past month, and the test results came back yesterday." I continued making breakfast while she built toward her revelation, recognizing the calculated pacing she'd perfected during my childhood. Whenever she wanted to manipulate me into compliance with some family obligation I'd tried to avoid. "Honey, I have a significant heart condition, arrhythmia with complications that could become very serious very quickly. Dr. Richardson said I need to avoid stress and make sure I'm surrounded by people who love me. He specifically mentioned that family support is crucial for my recovery process." A heart condition that conveniently appeared just when they needed additional leverage to force my attendance at the wedding. The timing was suspiciously perfect, and Linda's delivery lacked the genuine fear and uncertainty that would accompany a real medical crisis. "The thing is, sweetheart, having my whole family together at Jason's wedding would mean everything to me right now. Knowing that all my children are happy and successful and close to each other would give me such peace of mind during this difficult time. Dr. Richardson said that positive family experiences can actually help with healing." Positive family experiences that we'd never actually shared, but which Linda apparently believed could be manufactured for therapeutic purposes through a single weekend of forced togetherness and artificial harmony. "I didn't want to tell you about my condition because I didn't want you to worry, but Robert thought you should understand why this weekend is so important to me. It might be one of the last times we're all together as a complete family, and I want to create beautiful memories while we still can." One of the last times we're all together, implying that her condition was potentially terminal. Linda was escalating her emotional manipulation to the nuclear level, using the threat of death to coerce compliance with wedding attendance requirements. But something about her phrasing bothered me. Dr. Richardson had been our family physician when I was younger, and I remembered him being extremely cautious about patient confidentiality. He wouldn't have discussed treatment recommendations that involved family dynamics unless Linda had specifically asked him to provide talking points for manipulating her children. After hanging up, I decided to verify Linda's medical claims. I still had emergency contact privileges with Dr. Richardson's office from my college years when they'd needed to reach family members during a campus health crisis. A quick call to his office revealed information that completely contradicted Linda's story. Dr. Richardson confirmed that Linda had scheduled and canceled several appointments over the past month, but had never actually been seen for any cardiac concerns. She'd called asking about heart condition symptoms, but hadn't followed through with any diagnostic testing or treatment consultations. There was no diagnosis of arrhythmia or any other cardiac condition in her medical records. The office manager mentioned that Linda had specifically asked about documentation that might be needed for family medical leave purposes, suggesting she was researching how to create credible evidence for a fake medical emergency. Within hours, Emma joined the manipulation campaign with her own carefully crafted, emotional appeal. Her phone call came that afternoon, timed perfectly to catch me during my lunch break, when I'd be distracted and potentially more vulnerable to her practiced guilt-tripping techniques. "Darcy, I have incredible news that I wanted to share with you personally before anyone else finds out." Emma began with artificial excitement that didn't quite mask the calculated nature of her call. "I'm pregnant. Just found out yesterday, and I'm absolutely thrilled about becoming a mom." Pregnant at 22 with no stable relationship, no completed education, and no viable career prospects. Either Emma was making exceptionally poor life choices, or this was another strategic lie designed to manipulate my emotions and force compliance with family demands. The thing is, I really want you to be the godmother. You're my big sister, and even though we haven't talked much lately, I've always looked up to you and respected your intelligence and success. This baby is going to need strong female role models, and I can't think of anyone better than you. Always looked up to me and respected my intelligence. Emma had spent our entire childhood treating me with the same dismissive attitude as the rest of the family, acting like my interests and achievements were boring or irrelevant compared to her social activities and romantic drama. I'm planning to announce the pregnancy at Jason's wedding reception during the family toast. I want you standing right next to me when I share the news, showing everyone how close we sisters are. It'll be such a beautiful moment, and I know it'll make Mom cry happy tears. The pregnancy announcement at Jason's wedding reception would certainly create a memorable moment, but it would also completely overshadow the celebration and shift attention away from the bride and groom. Emma was either incredibly thoughtless about timing, or she was fabricating the pregnancy specifically to manipulate the wedding weekend dynamics. I've already started thinking about baby names and nursery themes. If it's a girl, I want to give her a name that honors you. Somehow, maybe Darla or Daria, something that shows how much her aunt means to me. And I'll need so much advice about everything from prenatal care to baby gear to balancing work and motherhood. Advice about balancing work and motherhood from someone whose work consisted of part-time retail shifts and whose understanding of motherhood was purely theoretical. Emma was promising a close relationship that had never existed between us, using her supposed pregnancy as the foundation for future bonding that would conveniently begin with my compliance at the wedding. But Emma's story had several inconsistencies that raised immediate red flags. Her social media accounts from the past week showed her drinking at multiple parties and clubs behavior that would be extremely irresponsible for someone who just discovered she was pregnant. Her Instagram posts included cocktail photos and check-ins at bars that would indicate either she was lying about the pregnancy or making dangerous choices about prenatal care. Additionally, Emma had been complaining publicly about being single and having no prospects for serious relationships. Her dating life consisted of casual encounters and short-term flings with men she described as totally wrong for anything long-term. The idea that she'd suddenly become pregnant and thrilled about single motherhood contradicted everything she'd been saying about her life goals and relationship priorities. When I pressed her for details about the father and her plans for prenatal care, Emma became vague and defensive, claiming she wanted to keep some things private until she'd had time to adjust to the news. Her reluctance to provide specifics reinforced my suspicion that the pregnancy was fictional, created specifically to manipulate my emotional response to the wedding situation. By evening, it was clear that both Linda and Emma had coordinated their emotional manipulation campaigns, probably at Robert's suggestion. The convenient timing of Linda's heart condition and Emma's pregnancy was too perfect to be coincidental. They'd identified the emotional triggers most likely to override my logical objections to participating in their wedding charade. The realization that my family was willing to lie about serious medical conditions and life-changing events just to coerce my cooperation was both devastating and illuminating. They'd abandoned any pretense of genuine relationship building in favor of calculated manipulation designed to force compliance with their social and financial agenda. That evening, I found myself emotionally drained from dealing with my family's escalating manipulation tactics. I'd planned to work late on a machine learning optimization project, but the stress of managing their lies and threats had left me unable to concentrate on complex algorithms and data modeling. Sarah Martinez, our startup's CEO and founder, noticed my distraction during our weekly team check-in meeting. After the formal discussion ended, she approached me with the kind of genuine concern I'd never experienced from my family members. "Darcy, you seem really stressed about something today. I know it's not work-related because your project contributions have been exceptional lately. Is there anything going on in your personal life that you'd like to talk about? Sarah's direct but compassionate approach made me realize how isolated I'd felt while dealing with my family's demands. In Denver, I'd built relationships with colleagues who actually cared about my well-being, rather than viewing me as a useful asset for their own purposes. I found myself explaining the entire situation from my family's failure to notice my move to Colorado through their current efforts to manipulate me into attending the wedding for social and financial reasons. Sarah listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding with understanding that suggested she'd encountered similar family dynamics in her own experience. "That's emotional abuse," she said bluntly when I finished describing their tactics. "They're using guilt threats and fabricated emergencies to control your behavior. The inheritance manipulation is particularly problematic because it's designed to make you financially dependent on their approval rather than recognizing your independent success." Hearing someone with Sarah's business experience and emotional intelligence identify my family's behavior as abusive was both validating and heartbreaking. I'd spent so many years minimizing their treatment, assuming that family relationships were naturally complicated and that my hurt feelings were probably overreactions to normal family dynamics. "You know what might be helpful here?" Sarah continued. "Let me write a letter documenting your value to our company and your compensation package. If they're going to threaten your inheritance based on claims about family loyalty, you should have documentation showing that you've built independent financial success that exceeds whatever they're trying to hold over your head." The idea of having professional documentation of my achievements and earnings was appealing, especially since my family had been misrepresenting my career to suit their own purposes. Sarah's offer represented the kind of genuine support I'd been craving from my family for years. Mark Chen, our lead developer and my closest colleague, overheard parts of our conversation and joined the discussion with his own insights about family manipulation and boundary setting. His perspective was particularly valuable because he dealt with similar pressures from relatives who'd tried to claim credit for his professional success. I had family members who suddenly became very interested in my career when they learned about my salary and stock options, Mark explained. They'd spent years dismissing technology work as playing on computers, but once money was involved, they wanted to present themselves as supportive relatives who'd always believed in my potential. Mark's experience resonated deeply with my current situation. His family had also tried to reshape their narrative about their relationship with him once his success became financially significant, just like my parents were doing with their bragging about my achievements while maintaining no actual relationship with me. The thing that helped me was setting very clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't do to maintain relationships with people who only valued me when it benefited them. Mark continued. I stopped participating in family events where I was expected to perform gratitude for support that had never actually been provided. Mark offered to help me document the timeline of my family's neglect and compare it to my independent achievements, creating a clear record of how my success had developed without their assistance or recognition. His suggestion appealed to my analytical nature and would provide concrete evidence to counter their narrative about family support and loyalty. During lunch the next day, I met with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the therapist I'd started seeing after moving to Denver. I'd initially sought counseling to process the emotional impact of relocating and starting fresh in a new city, but our sessions had gradually focused on understanding and healing from years of family dysfunction. What you're describing fits classic patterns of narcissistic family systems, Dr. Walsh explained after I'd updated her on the wedding situation. The parents maintain control through a combination of emotional manipulation, financial leverage, and gaslighting about the family's history and dynamics. Dr. Walsh helped me recognize that my family's sudden interest in my presence wasn't actually about wanting me there as a loved family member. Instead, they needed me to perform a role that would validate their constructed identity as successful parents of accomplished children. The inheritance threats are particularly revealing. Dr. Walsh continued. They're essentially saying that your worth as a family member is contingent on your compliance with their demands rather than recognizing your intrinsic value as their daughter and sister. Her professional perspective reinforced what I'd been feeling instinctively but hadn't been able to articulate clearly. My family was treating me like an employee whose job was to make them look good rather than a person deserving of unconditional love and respect. The fabricated medical emergencies and pregnancy announcements are escalation tactics designed to overwhelm your rational decision-making process, Dr. Walsh explained. When logical arguments fail to achieve their goals, dysfunctional families often resort to manufactured crises that make resistance seem cruel or selfish. Dr. Walsh encouraged me to consider what kind of relationship I actually wanted with my family members, separate from their expectations and demands. Her questions helped me realize that I'd been trying to earn love and acceptance from people who were fundamentally incapable of providing either in healthy ways. By the end of our session, I felt clearer about my situation than I had in days. My Denver support system was providing the validation and guidance I needed to make decisions based on my own well-being rather than my family's manipulation tactics. The contrast between my Colorado relationships and my family dynamics was striking. In Denver, people valued my contributions, respected my boundaries, and offered genuine support during difficult times. My colleagues and therapist were helping me navigate a challenging situation without expecting anything in return except my continued well-being and success. That afternoon brought an unexpected phone call that completely changed my understanding of the wedding situation and the Thornton family's actual perspective on Jason's claims about family relationships and professional achievements. "Hello, is this Darcy?" The voice was warm but businesslike, with the confident tone of someone accustomed to making important decisions quickly and efficiently. "This is Margaret Thornton, Chelsea's mother. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I got your number from the wedding planning coordinator." I was immediately curious about why Chelsea's mother would be contacting me directly rather than going through my parents, who'd been handling all the wedding communication and coordination with the Thornton family. "I've been hearing so much about you from your parents, and Jason and I have to admit, I'm quite eager to meet you in person. Your mother talks about your technology career with such pride, and your father mentioned your success with patent applications and startup investments." Margaret's tone was genuinely enthusiastic, but something in her phrasing suggested she might be seeking clarification about the stories she'd been told, rather than simply expressing social pleasantries about meeting new family members. "I hope this isn't too forward, but I'm also a businesswoman who's built companies in competitive industries, and I always enjoy connecting with other women who've found success in male-dominated fields. Your background in computer science and your work with innovative startups sounds fascinating." Her interest seemed authentic rather than superficial, which was refreshing after dealing with my family's manipulative attempts to use my career for their own purposes. Margaret was approaching me as a peer with genuine curiosity about my professional experiences. "I was actually hoping we could arrange to meet for lunch when you're in town for the wedding. I know your mother mentioned that you and she have regular mother-daughter outings, so I thought perhaps the three of us could get together for a meal and conversation." The lunch invitation created an immediate problem, since Linda's stories about our regular mother-daughter outings were complete fabrications. Meeting with Margaret would expose Linda's lies about our relationship and potentially damage Jason's engagement if Chelsea's family discovered the extent of the deception. "Chelsea's been so excited about gaining a sister, especially one with your professional background and achievements. She's already planning activities for you two to do together, and she's mentioned wanting your advice about balancing career and family priorities as she and Jason start their life together." Chelsea's excitement about gaining a sister who existed only in Jason's fabricated stories made me feel genuinely sorry for her. She was looking forward to forming a relationship with someone who wasn't the person Jason had described, and the eventual discovery of his lies would probably hurt her deeply. "I have to tell you, I'm particularly interested in your perspective on technology investments and innovation in traditional industries. My husband William is considering some major modernization projects for our manufacturing operations, and having input from someone with your background could be extremely valuable. William's interest in technology investments aligned with what I'd learned during my research about the Thornton family's business operations. Unlike my family's description of them as shallow social climbers, they were serious business people looking for legitimate opportunities to improve their operations through innovation. I hope you don't mind me being direct, but I've noticed some inconsistencies in the stories your family has shared about your career and your relationship with them. Nothing dramatic, just small details that don't quite align when different people talk about the same events. Margaret's diplomatic phrasing suggested she'd already identified problems with the narrative my family had been presenting. Her business experience had probably taught her to recognize when people were exaggerating their relationships or credentials for social advantage. For instance, your mother mentioned several specific conversations you've had about career challenges and family planning, but when I asked follow-up questions about timing and details, her answers seemed vague and inconsistent. And Jason's descriptions of mentoring your professional development don't quite match the timeline he's shared about your educational background. She'd caught Linda and Jason in their lies, or at least noticed enough inconsistencies to question the truthfulness of their stories. Margaret was conducting her own investigation into my family's claims, probably to protect Chelsea from marrying into a dishonest family. I want you to know that William and I value honesty and authenticity above social status or family drama. If there are complications in your family relationships, that's understandable and not necessarily problematic. What concerns us more is dishonesty about those relationships, especially when it's used to manipulate social situations or business opportunities. Her direct statement about valuing honesty over social status contradicted everything Robert had told me about the Thorntons' expectations for the wedding. They weren't interested in a perfectly harmonious family performance. They wanted genuine relationships and truthful communication. I'm also curious about your actual involvement in the wedding planning, because Chelsea mentioned that your mother described you as being very excited about serving as Jason's best woman. But when I asked Jason about that decision, he seemed surprised and said he thought Chelsea had misunderstood something his mother had mentioned. The best woman role Linda had volunteered me for was apparently news to Jason as well. She'd been making commitments on my behalf without consulting either me or the groom, creating confusion and potential conflict within the wedding party arrangements. Would you be willing to have an honest conversation with me about your actual relationship with your family and your real thoughts about this weekend? I promise that whatever you share will be kept confidential, but I think it would help me better understand the situation Chelsea is marrying into. Margaret's request for honesty was both refreshing and terrifying. She was offering me the opportunity to tell the truth about my family's dysfunction, but doing so would potentially destroy Jason's relationship and expose years of lies my family had been telling. I should also mention that William has been researching your professional background independently, and he's quite impressed with your actual achievements. Your work with machine learning optimization and your patent applications are exactly the kind of innovation he's looking for in potential business partnerships. William had been researching my background independently and found my real achievements impressive enough to consider business partnerships. Unlike my family's exaggerated stories, my actual career credentials were apparently strong enough to interest serious business investors. When I hung up the phone, I realized that Margaret's call had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the wedding weekend. The Thorntons weren't the shallow social climbers my family had described. They were successful business people who'd already identified problems with my family's stories and were seeking honest information about the real situation. The weekend was shaping up to be a confrontation between my family's fabricated narrative and the reality of our dysfunctional relationships with the Thorntons, positioned as truth-seeking investigators rather than easily deceived social contacts. Margaret Thornton's phone call had shifted my entire perspective on the wedding weekend, but it also motivated me to prepare for what was clearly going to become a confrontation between truth and the elaborate fiction my family had constructed. If the Thorntons valued honesty and were already suspicious of inconsistencies in my family's stories, I needed to be ready with documentation of the real facts. I spent the next morning working with my accountant, Patricia Reeves, to compile comprehensive documentation of my financial position. Patricia had been managing my investments and tax planning since I'd started earning significant income, and she understood the importance of having precise records when dealing with family financial disputes. "Your net worth has grown substantially over the past year," Patricia explained as she compiled the documentation. "Between your startup equity appreciation, cryptocurrency gains, and systematic investment contributions, you're currently worth approximately $8.7 million. $8.7 million. The number was staggering even to me, representing the cumulative result of years of careful financial planning, strategic career moves, and disciplined saving habits that my family had never acknowledged or encouraged. Your annual compensation package is particularly impressive," Patricia continued. "With your base salary of $400,000 performance bonuses, averaging $120,000 and equity appreciation, your total annual income exceeds $600,000. That puts you in the top 1% of earners nationally. $600,000 annually, more than my parents' combined lifetime peak earnings, even in their most successful years. While they'd been struggling with declining business revenue and accumulating debt, I'd been building wealth at a pace that made their inheritance threats meaningless from a practical standpoint. The cryptocurrency portfolio alone is worth more than most people's total retirement savings," Patricia noted. "Your early investment in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and several smaller altcoins has generated returns that exceed 3,000% over your initial investment amounts. My cryptocurrency investments had started during graduate school when I'd used small amounts of research stipend money to experiment with emerging digital assets. What began as academic curiosity about blockchain technology had evolved into a substantial wealth-building strategy that none of my family members had understood or supported. Your real estate equity is also significant," Patricia added. "The Denver condo has appreciated by 40% since your purchase, and your mortgage balance is now less than 60% of the property's current market value. You could refinance to access additional capital for investments, or you could pay off the mortgage entirely without affecting your liquidity position." The condo represented more than just real estate investment. It was tangible proof of my ability to make sound financial decisions independently, without guidance or assistance from family members who'd always treated me like I needed their wisdom and support to succeed. "What's particularly impressive is your debt-to-income ratio," Patricia explained. "Most high earners accumulate lifestyle debt as their income increases, but you've maintained disciplined spending habits while maximizing investment contributions. Your only debt is the mortgage, which is actually advantageous from a tax perspective given current interest rates." My disciplined spending habits had developed partially as a reaction to my family's financial irresponsibility. Watching Robert and Linda live beyond their means while criticizing my career choices had motivated me to prove that I could build wealth through smart decisions rather than inheritance dependence. I've prepared a comprehensive portfolio summary that documents your assets, income sources, and investment performance," Patricia said, handing me a professionally bound report. "This includes verification of your salary from the startup documentation of your equity positions, records of your cryptocurrency holdings, and summaries of your traditional investment accounts." The portfolio summary was impressive even in its physical presentation, with detailed charts and graphs that illustrated the steady growth of my wealth over time. It looked like the kind of documentation that serious investors would prepare when seeking major business partnerships or venture capital funding. "I've also included comparative analysis showing how your financial position relates to various benchmarks," Patricia added. "Your net worth exceeds 99% of Americans in your age group, and your annual income growth rate has been consistently above market averages for technology professionals. The comparative analysis put my achievements in perspective, demonstrating that my success wasn't just impressive relative to my family's situation, but represented exceptional performance by any reasonable standard. I'd built wealth faster and more systematically than most people ever manage, regardless of their starting advantages. If you're dealing with family members who question your financial independence or threaten inheritance-related consequences, this documentation should provide compelling evidence of your economic security. Patricia concluded, "You're not dependent on anyone else's financial decisions, and your wealth-building trajectory suggests continued growth regardless of external factors." Armed with Patricia's documentation, I felt prepared to respond to my family's threats and manipulations with concrete evidence rather than emotional arguments. They'd been trying to leverage inheritance money as a control mechanism, not realizing that I'd already built more wealth than they could threaten to withhold. That afternoon, I also requested documentation from my employer about my professional value and career trajectory. Sarah Martinez was happy to provide a letter detailing my contributions to the company's success, including specific projects I'd led, patents I'd developed, and the financial impact of my innovations on company revenue. Darcy's work on machine learning optimization has been instrumental in our ability to attract Series B funding, Sarah wrote in the letter. Her technical innovations have generated measurable improvements in our product performance, and her leadership on key projects has accelerated our development timeline by approximately 18 months. The letter went on to describe my role in securing major client contracts, my contributions to the company's intellectual property portfolio, and the industry recognition I'd received for my technical work. It painted a picture of someone who was not only financially successful, but also professionally respected and technically accomplished. We consider Darcy to be irreplaceable in her current role and have structured her compensation package to reflect her exceptional value to the organization. Sarah's letter concluded, "Her continued employment is crucial to our growth strategy, and we've allocated significant equity positions to ensure her long-term commitment to the company." The professional documentation complemented Patricia's financial summary, perfectly providing evidence that my success was based on genuine merit and market value rather than luck or family connections. Together, the documents created an unassailable case for my independence and achievement. I also compiled records of my family's failed attempts to contact me over the past 6 months, including phone logs that showed no missed calls from any family member until Robert's wedding-related demands began. The communication records provided clear evidence that they'd made no effort to maintain relationships with me until they needed something for their own purposes. Email searches revealed similar patterns, with no family correspondence in my inbox except promotional messages from Linda's boutique and automated birthday greetings from social media platforms. They'd maintained no meaningful contact with me, while apparently telling the Thorntons about our close relationships and regular communication. By evening, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier that documented both my success and my family's neglect. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable, providing clear support for any decisions I might make about the wedding weekend and future family relationships. Looking at the financial documentation spread across my dining room table, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, mixed with sadness about what these documents represented. I'd achieved everything I'd ever dreamed of professionally and financially, but I'd done it entirely without the support or recognition of the people who should have been celebrating my successes. The inheritance money my family was so desperate to protect represented less than 10% of my current net worth. Their threats to disinherit me were essentially meaningless from a financial perspective, though they remained painful from an emotional standpoint because of what they revealed about their priorities and values. Robert called again that evening, but this time, his tone carried an edge of desperation that hadn't been present in our previous conversations. Apparently, my continued resistance to their demands was creating problems they hadn't anticipated, and the wedding weekend was approaching with several unresolved issues that threatened their carefully constructed narrative. Darcy, I've been patient with your attitude and your unreasonable demands, but this situation has gone far enough. Chelsea's family is asking direct questions about when they'll meet you, and Linda's running out of excuses for why you haven't been involved in any of the wedding planning activities. I put the phone on speaker and continued reviewing the financial documentation Patricia had prepared, while listening to Robert escalate into the verbal abuse that had characterized much of my childhood whenever I'd failed to comply with family expectations. You've always been selfish and ungrateful, but this level of selfishness is beyond anything I expected even from you. Your brother's future depends on making a good impression this weekend, and you're sabotaging his chances because of some imaginary grievances about not getting enough attention. Imaginary grievances. Robert was rewriting history to frame years of systematic neglect as normal family dynamics that I'd misinterpreted due to oversensitivity or unrealistic expectations about parental attention and support. I've supported you through college, provided opportunities for you to succeed, and now that you've achieved some modest success in your career, you think you're too good for your family. That attitude is going to cost you everything if you don't adjust it immediately. Supported me through college by ignoring my achievements and missing important events, provided opportunities by dismissing my interests and discouraging my career choices. The revisionist version of our history was breathtaking in its complete departure from actual events. This is your final warning, Darcy. If you don't confirm your attendance at this wedding by tomorrow morning, I'm calling the trust attorneys and initiating proceedings to have your inheritance redistributed to Jason and Emma. You'll be completely cut off from family financial support, and you'll regret that decision for the rest of your life. Robert's threats were escalating to ultimatum territory, probably because he'd realized that emotional manipulation wasn't working, and financial leverage was his last remaining tool for forcing compliance with his demands. And another thing. Robert continued, his voice rising with anger. I've been hearing rumors that you've been bad-mouthing the family to outsiders, telling people lies about how we've treated you. That kind of disloyalty is unacceptable, and it needs to stop immediately. Rumors about bad-mouthing the family suggested that Margaret Thornton had been asking follow-up questions about the inconsistencies she'd noticed in their stories. Robert was probably panicking about the potential exposure of their lies and trying to blame me for problems they'd created through their own dishonesty. You've always been jealous of Jason's success and Emma's popularity, and now you're trying to destroy Jason's wedding because you can't stand seeing him happy. That's pathetic, Darcy, even for you. Jealous of Jason's success at failing his real estate licensing requirements and Emma's popularity at part-time retail work. Robert's attempts to reframe my accomplishments as jealousy of my siblings' struggles demonstrated how completely detached he'd become from reality. But Robert's verbal abuse had triggered something in me that was different from our previous conversations. Instead of feeling hurt or defensive, I felt calm and analytical, like I was observing a case study in dysfunctional family dynamics rather than being personally attacked by my father. Robert. I interrupted, using his first name deliberately to signal that I was no longer accepting the parent-child dynamic he'd been trying to maintain. I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully without interrupting. My tone was steady and professional, the same voice I used when delivering project presentations to senior executives who needed to understand complex technical concepts quickly and clearly. I've been recording all of our phone conversations since this wedding situation began. Every threat, every manipulation attempt, every lie you've told about our family relationships. I have documentation of everything you've said to me over the past week. The silence on the other end of the line was complete and telling. Robert hadn't expected me to be systematically documenting his behavior, and the legal implications of recorded threats probably hadn't occurred to him until that moment. I've also been investigating your financial claims about the trust fund and your business operations. I know about the debt problems with your insurance agency, Linda's bankruptcy issues with the boutique, and Jason's failed real estate career. Your threats about inheritance money are particularly interesting given your own financial dependence on trust fund distributions. I could hear Robert's breathing change as he realized that I'd uncovered information he'd assumed would remain private. His financial leverage strategy was collapsing because I'd done the research necessary to understand the real power dynamics in our family situation. But here's the part that's going to surprise you, Robert. I've had my accountant compile documentation of my actual financial position, and I think you'll find the numbers quite interesting. I opened Patricia's portfolio summary and began reading key figures in the same matter-of-fact tone I'd use to present quarterly business results to board members. My current net worth is $8.7 million. My annual income is over $600,000. My investment portfolio generates more in quarterly returns than your insurance agency grosses in annual revenue. The inheritance money you're threatening to withhold represents approximately 8% of my current assets. The silence stretched longer this time, punctuated only by what sounded like Robert setting down his phone and walking away from it before returning to continue our conversation. My cryptocurrency investments alone are worth more than your house, Linda's boutique, and Jason's car combined. My startup equity has appreciated to over $5 million following our latest funding round. I own real estate outright and carry no consumer debt whatsoever. Each financial detail was hitting Robert like a physical blow, destroying his assumptions about my dependence on family financial support and his ability to control my behavior through inheritance threats. So when you threaten to cut off my inheritance, you're essentially threatening to withhold pocket change from someone who makes more money than your entire family combined. When you demand that I participate in your wedding charade to protect your access to trust fund payments, you're asking someone who's financially independent to help subsidize your lifestyle of borrowed money and failed businesses. I paused to let the implications sink in before delivering the final devastating revelation about my conversation with Margaret Thornton. And, Robert, there's one more thing you should know. Margaret Thornton called me directly yesterday. She's been investigating the inconsistencies in your stories about our family relationships, and she's already figured out that you've been lying about pretty much everything. The Thorntons aren't the social climbing status seekers you described. They're successful business people who value honesty and are concerned about Chelsea marrying into a family built on deception. The phone clattered as if Robert had dropped it, followed by muffled sounds of what might have been him talking to Linda in increasingly panicked tones about damage control and crisis management. When he returned to our conversation, his voice had completely changed from threatening authority figure to desperate supplicant trying to negotiate from a position of weakness rather than strength. Darcy, I think there's been some misunderstandings about this situation. Maybe we should sit down and have a calm discussion about what's really going on here. Misunderstandings. After years of systematic neglect and a week of escalating threats, Robert was suddenly interested in calm discussions and understanding my perspective. His transformation from dictator to diplomat had occurred exactly when he'd realized that his leverage had evaporated. When I hung up the phone, I felt something I'd never experienced in my relationship with my family. For the first time in my life, I held all the power in our dynamic, and they were the ones who needed something from me, rather than the reverse. The next morning brought a series of increasingly frantic phone calls that demonstrated just how thoroughly my financial revelations had disrupted my family's wedding strategy and social positioning with the Thornton family. The carefully constructed facade was crumbling rapidly, and each family member was responding to the crisis in characteristically dysfunctional ways. Jason called first, his voice carrying a level of panic I'd never heard from him before. The confident, condescending tone he'd used throughout our childhood had been replaced by genuine fear about the collapse of his engagement and future prospects. Darcy, what did you say to Chelsea's parents? Margaret Thornton called Chelsea last night, asking detailed questions about my family relationships and professional background. She wanted to know specific dates for family gatherings I'd supposedly attended and details about career advice I'd supposedly given you. Margaret had apparently moved beyond subtle investigation into direct fact-checking, probably after my conversation with Robert had confirmed her suspicions about my family's dishonesty. She was protecting her daughter by verifying claims before the wedding proceeded. Chelsea's starting to ask questions about things that don't add up in my stories about our family. She wants to know why you've never visited us in Ohio if we're so close, and why none of the photos from family gatherings include you. I've been trying to explain, but she's getting suspicious about inconsistencies in my timeline. The inconsistencies Jason was struggling to explain were the inevitable result of building relationships on fabricated stories rather than authentic experiences. He'd created a fictional version of our family dynamics that couldn't withstand basic, factual scrutiny from intelligent people. Margaret also mentioned that she's been researching your professional background independently, and she's impressed with your actual achievements. She said your real career credentials are more impressive than anything I'd described, which doesn't make sense because I've been bragging about your success for months. Jason's confusion about Margaret's reaction revealed that he'd never actually understood the scope of my professional accomplishments. He'd been exaggerating vague details without realizing that my real achievements were already extraordinary by any reasonable standard. The worst part is that William Thornton wants to meet with me privately before the wedding to discuss what he calls family integrity issues. He's concerned about building business relationships with people who misrepresent their backgrounds or personal relationships. William's request for a private meeting about family integrity issues suggested that the Thorntons were considering canceling the wedding, or at least postponing it until they could verify the truthfulness of Jason's claims about our family situation. Darcy, I'm begging you to help me fix this situation. I know we haven't been the closest siblings, but this is my entire future we're talking about. Chelsea is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and her family could transform my career prospects. Jason's acknowledgement that we haven't been the closest siblings was the first honest statement he'd made about our relationship, though it dramatically understated years of active hostility and systematic exclusion from family activities. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll admit that I exaggerated some details about our relationship. I'll apologize for not being more supportive of your career. I'll even give you credit publicly for your achievements instead of claiming I helped with your success. His willingness to admit exaggeration and apologize represented a complete reversal from his previous attitude, but it was motivated by crisis management rather than genuine remorse about years of treating me poorly. Within an hour, Emma called with her own version of panic about the family situation, though her concerns focused more on social embarrassment than genuine relationship repair or personal growth. Darcy, Mom told me about your phone call with Dad, and she's completely falling apart. She's been crying all morning about how the Thorntons are going to discover that she lied about your relationship, and she's terrified that Chelsea will call off the wedding. Linda's breakdown was predictable, given that her entire social strategy had been built on fictional stories about family harmony and close mother-daughter relationships that had never existed outside her imagination. The thing is, I kind of need this wedding to go well, too. I've been telling my friends about how connected our family is to the Thornton wealth and influence. I may have exaggerated about potential job opportunities and social connections that could come from having them as in-laws. Emma had been leveraging Jason's engagement for her own social and professional advantage, building expectations among her peer group about benefits she'd receive from associating with the Thornton family name and resources. And about the pregnancy thing, I need to tell you something. I'm not actually pregnant. I made that up because Mom said we needed to find ways to make you feel guilty about missing family events. But now I'm worried that if the truth comes out, it'll make our whole family look even more dishonest. Emma's admission about fabricating the pregnancy removed any remaining doubt about my family's willingness to lie about major life events in order to manipulate my emotional responses and force compliance with their demands. I know it was wrong to lie about something that serious, but I was just trying to help with the family situation. Mom said you've always been a sucker for emotional appeals, and she thought a pregnancy announcement would override your logical objections to participating in the wedding. A sucker for emotional appeals. My family had been systematically studying my personality and emotional responses to develop more effective manipulation strategies, treating me like a target for psychological manipulation rather than a family member deserving of honest communication. Darcy, is it true what Dad said about you being worth millions of dollars? Because if that's real, maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement where you help the family financially, in exchange for us being more honest about relationships and giving you more respect. Emma was already trying to leverage my financial success into some kind of transaction where my wealth could purchase the family respect and honesty that should have been provided unconditionally. She was treating love and acceptance like commodities that could be bought rather than emotional bonds that should be freely given. The most devastating call came that afternoon from Linda, whose emotional breakdown had progressed to the point where she was barely coherent through her crying and hyperventilation about the social catastrophe she was facing. Darcy, I don't know what to do. Margaret Thornton knows I lied about everything. She asked me to show her photos from our recent mother-daughter activities, and when I couldn't produce any, she started asking direct questions about when we'd last spoken before this wedding situation. Linda's web of lies had finally collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, and she was facing the social humiliation of being exposed as someone who'd fabricated relationships and experiences to impress wealthy acquaintances. She also mentioned that you have a very successful career and impressive financial situation. She seemed confused about why I hadn't been more specific about your achievements, and she asked if there were family problems that would explain the discrepancies in our stories. Margaret's questions about family problems suggested she was trying to understand whether my family's dishonesty stemmed from dysfunction or malicious intent. She was probably evaluating whether Chelsea would be marrying into a troubled family or a deliberately deceptive one. William's threatening to cancel the entire wedding unless we can provide honest explanations for all the inconsistencies they've discovered. They've spent over $100,000 on this celebration, and they're saying they won't proceed unless they're confident about the integrity of Jason's family background. The Thorntons were prepared to absorb a substantial financial loss rather than proceeding with a wedding built on lies and deception. Their willingness to cancel expensive arrangements demonstrated that they valued honesty over social obligations or financial considerations. Darcy, please, I'm begging you to help us save this situation. I know I haven't been the mother you deserved, but if you come to this wedding and help us show the Thorntons that we're a real family who loves each other, maybe we can fix everything and start over with honest relationships. Linda's plea for help saving the situation was the closest she'd come to acknowledging that our family relationships were broken and needed fundamental repair rather than cosmetic improvements for social appearances. But her request to help them show the Thorntons that we're a real family who loves each other revealed that she still didn't understand the core problem. She was asking me to participate in another performance, albeit a more honest one, rather than recognizing that genuine family relationships couldn't be manufactured for an audience. By evening, the pattern was clear. My family's panic about the wedding crisis was focused on damage control and social preservation, rather than genuine recognition of the years of dysfunction that had created this situation. They wanted me to help them manage the consequences of their dishonesty without addressing the underlying problems that had made their lies necessary in the first place. That evening brought an unexpected phone call that completely transformed my understanding of the inheritance situation and revealed that my family's financial leverage had been based on misrepresentations that were even more extensive than I'd initially realized. Miss Darcy Patterson. This is Harold Whitfield from Whitfield, Santos & Associates. We're the law firm that manages your grandfather's estate and trust fund administration. I'm calling because there have been some concerning developments regarding your family's trust fund distributions that require immediate attention. I'd never heard from the estate lawyers directly, which was unusual given that I was supposedly a primary beneficiary of my grandfather's trust fund. All communication about inheritance matters had been filtered through Robert, who'd apparently been controlling information flow to maintain his manipulation strategies. I want to start by clarifying some misconceptions that seem to have developed about the terms and conditions of your grandfather's trust. Based on recent inquiries from your father, I believe you may have been given inaccurate information about the distribution requirements and family relationship provisions. Harold's careful phrasing suggested that Robert had been misrepresenting the trust fund terms, probably to make his inheritance threats seem more credible and his demands more reasonable than they actually were. Your grandfather's trust does include provisions encouraging family harmony, but those requirements are much more flexible than what your father has apparently described to you. The trust administrators have discretionary authority to evaluate family relationships based on individual circumstances rather than requiring uniform participation in family events. Individual circumstances rather than uniform participation. The trust fund wasn't the rigid system of family control that Robert had described. Instead, it was designed to accommodate different family dynamics and personal situations while encouraging healthy relationships. More importantly, the trust includes specific provisions protecting beneficiaries from coercion or manipulation by family members who might try to use inheritance distributions as leverage for controlling behavior. Your grandfather was very concerned about preventing financial abuse within family relationships. My grandfather had anticipated exactly the kind of manipulation Robert had been attempting, and had included protections against inheritance-related coercion in the trust documents. Robert's threats had actually violated the trust's fundamental principles. I've been reviewing the documentation your father submitted to support his claims about family relationship requirements, and I've discovered several factual inaccuracies that are quite concerning from a legal perspective. Factual inaccuracies in Robert's documentation suggested he'd been falsifying information to the trust administrators, probably to make his inheritance access seem more secure and his threats against me more credible. For instance, your father has been submitting annual reports claiming that all 3 grandchildren maintain regular contact with family members and participate actively in family gatherings and celebrations. However, our independent verification process has revealed significant discrepancies between his claims and the actual documented evidence. Independent verification process. The trust administrators had been fact-checking Robert's claims about family relationships, and they'd discovered that his reports didn't match reality. His deception had extended beyond manipulating me to include lying to legal professionals about family dynamics. We've also discovered that your father has been receiving annual payments from the trust that were specifically designated for facilitating positive relationships between family members. However, the evidence suggests that he's been using those payments for personal expenses while failing to fulfill his responsibilities as family relationship coordinator. Family relationship coordinator payments that Robert had been collecting while systematically failing to maintain actual relationships with his children. He'd been paid to foster family unity while driving family members away through neglect and manipulation. Based on these discoveries, we're initiating a comprehensive review of all trust fund distributions over the past 5 years. This review will examine whether payments have been made based on accurate information and whether the trust's relationship-building goals have been achieved. A comprehensive review that would expose years of Robert's deception and financial mismanagement. The trust fund investigation would probably result in significant financial consequences for him, potentially including repayment of improperly received distributions. However, the primary reason for my call today is to inform you that the trust administrators have been following your professional achievements and financial independence with great interest. Your grandfather specifically included provisions rewarding grandchildren who demonstrate exceptional self-reliance and career success. provisions rewarding self-reliance and career success. My grandfather had anticipated that some of his grandchildren might achieve financial independence and had created incentives for professional accomplishment rather than family dependency. Given your documented financial achievements and your independence from family financial support, you qualify for what the trust calls accelerated distribution benefits that would provide you with immediate access to your full inheritance amount rather than waiting for standard distribution schedules. Accelerated distribution benefits based on my financial success. Instead of being punished for family relationship problems, I was eligible for enhanced inheritance benefits because of my professional achievements and economic independence. The accelerated distribution amount would be approximately $2.3 million payable immediately upon completion of the review process. This distribution is independent of any other family member's inheritance rights and cannot be affected by family relationship dynamics or other beneficiaries' actions. $2.3 million that I'd receive regardless of wedding attendance, family harmony performance, or Robert's approval. The inheritance leverage he'd been using against me was completely fictional, and my actual inheritance rights were more substantial than he'd ever admitted. Additionally, the trust administrators are considering appointing you as the new family relationship coordinator, given your professional success and independence from the family financial dynamics that have compromised your father's effectiveness in that role. Family relationship coordinator with authority over trust fund distributions to other family members. The power dynamics Robert had been trying to maintain through threats and manipulation were actually reversing, with me potentially gaining control over the financial leverage he'd been wielding against me. The coordinator position includes annual compensation of $50,000, plus discretionary authority over relationship-building initiatives and family event funding. You would have the authority to determine which family activities receive trust fund support and which family members demonstrate genuine commitment to healthy relationships. Annual compensation plus discretionary authority over family event funding. I'd be paid to evaluate family relationships and determine whether my parents and siblings were meeting the trust fund's requirements for promoting family unity and healthy dynamics. I should also mention that the coordinator position includes the authority to establish new requirements for family members who wish to maintain their inheritance eligibility. You could implement standards for honest communication, respectful treatment of family members, and genuine participation in relationship-building activities. Authority to establish new requirements that would effectively give me the power to hold my family accountable for their treatment of me and their commitment to honest relationships rather than manipulative performances. When Harold concluded our call, I sat in my Denver apartment feeling like I'd stepped into an alternate reality, where all the power dynamics I'd grown up with had been completely reversed. Instead of being the dependent child begging for approval and acceptance, I was suddenly the family member with the most financial leverage and legal authority. The inheritance money Robert had been threatening to withhold was actually much larger than he'd admitted, and my access to it was protected by provisions that prevented exactly the kind of manipulation he'd been attempting. Moreover, I was eligible for a position that would give me financial authority over the family members who'd been trying to control me through inheritance threats. The irony was overwhelming. My success at building wealth independently had not only made their inheritance threats meaningless, but it also qualified me for enhanced inheritance benefits and family financial authority. Everything they'd tried to use against me had actually worked in my favor. Friday afternoon, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. Instead of boycotting Jason's wedding or attempting to negotiate some compromise with my family's dysfunction, I decided to attend the wedding weekend on my own terms with my own agenda and surrounded by people who actually valued my presence, rather than merely needing my performance. I called Sarah Martinez and Mark Chen from my startup team and invited them to join me for the weekend as my guests. I also invited Alex Rodriguez, the software architect I'd been dating for the past 3 months, who understood family dysfunction from his own experience with manipulative relatives. "Are you sure you want us there for this family confrontation?" Sarah asked when I explained the situation. "It sounds like it could get pretty intense, and we don't want to make things more complicated by being outsiders witnessing family drama." Sarah's concern was thoughtful, but I'd realized that surrounding myself with genuine supporters would provide the emotional stability I needed to navigate the weekend without falling back into old patterns of seeking approval from people who'd never offered it unconditionally. "Actually, I think having you there will help me maintain perspective about what healthy relationships look like," I explained. "My family's going to try to manipulate me into feeling guilty about years of dysfunction, and having people around who've seen my actual character and achievements will help me stay grounded in reality." Mark immediately understood the strategic value of bringing allies to a family confrontation. "It's like code reviews," he said with a grin. "Having external observers present makes it harder for people to gaslight you or rewrite history about what actually happened." Alex's perspective was particularly valuable because he'd dealt with similar family manipulation during his own career transition from academic research to technology entrepreneurship. His family had tried to claim credit for his success while providing no actual support during the challenging early stages of his career development. We flew to Ohio Friday evening and checked into the Marriott downtown, where I'd reserved a suite for the weekend that was significantly more luxurious than the standard room Jason had offered to book for me. The upgrade was a small but meaningful assertion of my independence and financial capability. Saturday morning brought the wedding rehearsal and brunch events where I'd finally meet the Thornton family in person and confront the elaborate fiction my family had constructed about our relationships and their own social and professional standing. Margaret Thornton greeted me at the country club with warmth that felt genuine rather than performative, immediately putting me at ease about what I'd expected to be an awkward social encounter, filled with uncomfortable questions about family inconsistencies. "Darcy, I'm so pleased to finally meet you in person. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since I started investigating your actual background and achievements rather than relying on your family's descriptions." Margaret's directness was refreshing after days of dealing with manipulation and deception. She was treating me like an adult professional rather than a prop in someone else's social performance. "I have to admit, I've been quite impressed with your real career credentials and financial accomplishments. Your work with machine learning optimization is exactly the kind of innovation my husband's been seeking for our manufacturing operations, and your patent applications demonstrate the kind of thinking that could revolutionize traditional industrial processes." William Thornton joined our conversation with similar directness about his interest in my professional background and his concerns about the dishonesty he'd discovered in Jason's family representations. "I've built my business on the principle that integrity is more valuable than any short-term advantage gained through deception," William explained. "When I discovered inconsistencies in the stories your family had been sharing, I became concerned about what other aspects of their character might be questionable." His concern about character issues extended beyond social embarrassment to genuine worry about Chelsea's long-term happiness and security in a marriage built on false foundations, about family relationships and personal integrity. However, I've also learned that family dysfunction doesn't necessarily reflect on individual character, especially when someone has demonstrated independence and success despite challenging family dynamics. William's distinction between family dysfunction and individual character was exactly what I'd hoped to hear. He was evaluating me based on my own merits, rather than holding me responsible for my family's behavior or excluding me because of their dishonesty. "Chelsea's very excited about gaining a sister, particularly one with your professional background and achievements. She's been planning activities for you two to do together, and she's mentioned wanting your advice about balancing career ambitions with family responsibilities." Chelsea approached our conversation with enthusiasm that seemed completely genuine, unmarred by knowledge of the family drama swirling around the weekend's events or the lies that had been told about our relationships. "I have to tell you, when Jason talks about you, his face lights up with pride about your success. Even though he mentions that you two haven't spent as much time together recently as he'd like, it's clear that he admires your achievements and independence." Jason's genuine pride about my success was news to me, since he'd never expressed those feelings directly during any of our recent conversations. Either Chelsea was misinterpreting his emotions, or Jason had been hiding his real feelings about my achievements behind years of competitive sibling dynamics. I'm particularly interested in your perspective on women in technology and the challenges of building careers in male-dominated industries. I'm considering going back to school for an MBA with a focus on technology management, and I'd love to hear about your experience navigating those professional environments. Chelsea's interest in technology management and her questions about my career experience represented the kind of genuine connection I'd been craving from family members for years. She was treating me as a mentor and resource rather than a prop for social advancement. Throughout the morning's events, I was struck by the contrast between the Thorntons' authentic interest in building relationships and my family's desperate attempts to manage appearances and control narratives. Margaret and William asked thoughtful questions about my life and career because they genuinely wanted to understand my experiences and perspectives. Meanwhile, Robert and Linda spent the morning hovering anxiously around conversations, clearly terrified that I'd reveal additional details about our family dysfunction or contradict the stories they'd been telling for months. Jason's behavior was the most complex to navigate because he seemed genuinely conflicted between his manipulative demands for wedding performance and what appeared to be real pride about my achievements when he thought no one was monitoring his reactions. Darcy, I need to apologize for some things I said during our phone conversations this week. Jason said privately during a break between events. I've been so stressed about impressing Chelsea's family that I lost sight of what's actually important about family relationships. His apology sounded more genuine than his previous crisis management attempts, but I remained cautious about accepting it without seeing evidence of sustained behavior change rather than temporary remorse motivated by wedding pressure. The most telling moment of the morning came when Margaret mentioned her research into my professional background and her surprise at discovering that my real achievements exceeded anything my family had described. It's unusual for parents to understate their children's accomplishments, Margaret observed. Most families we know tend to exaggerate their children's success rather than minimizing genuine achievements. Her observation highlighted the fundamental problem with my family's approach to relationships. Instead of celebrating my actual success, they'd been using vague references to my career for social leverage, while maintaining no real knowledge of or interest in my specific accomplishments. By lunchtime, it was clear that the Thorntons had formed their own opinions about my character and capabilities based on direct interaction rather than family reports. They were treating me as a valued addition to their extended family rather than a problematic relative who needed management or rehabilitation. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my Denver office looking back on that wedding weekend and the dramatic changes it catalyzed in every aspect of my family relationships and personal understanding of self-worth and healthy boundaries. The wedding proceeded successfully, but not according to my family's original script. Instead of performing artificial harmony for social appearances, we navigated the weekend with honest conversations about our relationship problems and genuine commitments to building better connections based on mutual respect rather than manipulation. Margaret and William Thornton became unexpected allies in facilitating those honest conversations, using their influence with Jason and Chelsea to encourage transparency about family dynamics rather than perpetuating the fictional narratives that had characterized so much of our previous interactions. We've learned that sustainable relationships require authenticity, Margaret explained during our final conversation of the weekend. Marriages and families built on false foundations inevitably collapse under the weight of their contradictions, but relationships rooted in truth and mutual respect can weather any challenges. Her wisdom proved prophetic in the months that followed, as my family struggled to adapt to new dynamics based on honesty rather than performance and manipulation. Robert and Linda initially resisted the changes, continuing to attempt emotional manipulation and guilt-tripping whenever I established boundaries or refused to participate in their drama. However, my new role as family relationship coordinator gave me the authority to implement consequences for behavior that violated the trust fund's principles of healthy family interaction. If you want to maintain your inheritance eligibility, I explained during one particularly difficult conversation about their continued manipulation attempts. You need to demonstrate genuine commitment to respectful communication and honest relationship building rather than treating family members as assets for social advancement. The financial leverage that Robert had tried to use against me became a tool for holding him accountable for his treatment of family members and his commitment to positive change rather than surface-level compliance with trust fund requirements. Jason's transformation was the most surprising and encouraging development of the past 6 months. Once the wedding pressure was resolved and he no longer needed to maintain fictional narratives about our family relationships, he began reaching out with genuine interest in building authentic connections. "I realize I've been competing with you instead of supporting you for most of our lives," Jason admitted during one of our monthly phone calls. "I was so insecure about my own achievements that I couldn't celebrate yours, and I ended up creating rivalry instead of the sibling relationship we could have had." His acknowledgement of the competitive dynamics and his commitment to changing them represented real growth rather than temporary crisis management. "We've been slowly building trust and friendship based on who we actually are rather than who our parents expected us to be." Emma's evolution has been more gradual but equally meaningful. She's begun taking responsibility for her own career development and financial independence, rather than relying on family connections and social manipulation to create opportunities. "I want to build success like you did," Emma told me recently, "through my own work and achievements rather than through other people's accomplishments or family name recognition." Her decision to pursue nursing school and develop genuine professional skills represents a fundamental shift from the entitled attitude that characterized her approach to life during our childhood and early adult years. Chelsea has become the sister I never knew I wanted, offering the kind of supportive, encouraging relationship I'd always hoped to have with family members. She's pursued her MBA in technology management and frequently seeks advice about career development and work-life balance. "You've shown me that family relationships should enhance your life rather than drain your energy," Chelsea observed during one of our regular lunch meetings. Jason's learning to be more supportive and less competitive, partially because he sees how much happier he is when he celebrates other people's success instead of feeling threatened by it. The Thorntons have become honorary family members, providing the kind of emotional support and genuine interest in my well-being that I'd never experienced from my biological relatives. Margaret and William have become mentors and friends who celebrate my achievements because they care about my happiness rather than because my success reflects well on them. "You've taught us that biological family and chosen family can coexist beautifully when everyone involved is committed to growth and authenticity," Margaret said during a recent conversation about family dynamics and relationship building. "My startup has continued thriving with my equity position, now worth over $12 million, following our Series C funding round. The professional recognition and financial success have provided security and confidence that make family manipulation attempts completely ineffective. Most importantly, I've learned that self-worth must come from internal recognition of your own value rather than external validation from people who may be incapable of providing genuine love and support. My years of seeking approval from family members who were fundamentally self-centered had prevented me from recognizing my own accomplishments and building confidence based on my actual character and achievements. The inheritance money from my grandfather's trust fund has been distributed according to the accelerated schedule, providing additional financial security, but also confirming that my independence was never dependent on family approval or compliance with their demands. My relationship with Alex has deepened into a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine appreciation for each other's character and accomplishments. He's become my chosen family, providing the kind of unconditional support and encouragement that makes life's challenges manageable and successes meaningful. You've shown me what healthy family relationships look like, Alex told me recently. The way you've handled your family transformation while maintaining your own boundaries and integrity is incredibly inspiring. The life lesson that crystallized from this entire experience is that family isn't defined by blood relationships or social obligations, but by mutual respect, genuine care, and commitment to each other's well-being and growth. Sometimes you have to remove yourself from toxic situations to discover your own worth, and sometimes you have to demand better treatment to teach people how to value your presence in their lives. True success isn't measured by other people's recognition or approval, but by your own sense of accomplishment, integrity, and contribution to the world around you. When you build genuine self-worth based on your character and achievements, other people's manipulation attempts lose their power to control your behavior or emotions. Family relationships, like all meaningful connections, require ongoing effort, honesty, and mutual respect to flourish. When those elements are present, families can overcome significant dysfunction and build healthier dynamics. When they're absent, it's sometimes necessary to create distance until people demonstrate genuine commitment to positive change. Looking back, I'm grateful for the crisis that forced these conversations and changes. Without the wedding weekend confrontation, we might have continued perpetuating dysfunctional patterns for years, never addressing the underlying problems that prevented us from building genuine relationships with each other. The most profound realization has been that love and respect cannot be demanded or manipulated into existence, but they can be earned through consistent demonstration of integrity, kindness, and genuine care for other people's well-being and happiness. What's your experience with family relationships and setting boundaries with people who've taken you for granted? Have you ever had to choose between maintaining peace and demanding better treatment from family members? I'd love to hear your stories and thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with your own experiences with family dynamics or building independence, please give it a like to show your support. And if you think someone in your life could benefit from hearing about the importance of self-worth and healthy boundaries, please share this story with them. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family dysfunction, building financial independence, and creating the life you deserve on your own terms. Your journey toward authentic relationships and genuine success deserves to be celebrated and supported. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it encourages you to value yourself enough to demand the respect and love you deserve from the people in your life.